Listen carefully. This is not a message you casually play in the background. This is a moment of recognition. If you are here, it is because something within you has already been stirring. You've felt it in the quiet moments, in the pauses between conversations, in the growing sense that you no longer fit where you once belonged. You may have tried to explain it logically, to label it as restlessness, boredom, or dissatisfaction, but logic cannot fully explain spiritual separation. What you are experiencing is not loss, it is not failure, it is not punishment, it is protection. There is a reason your tolerance for shallow interactions has diminished. There is a reason certain environments now feel heavy, certain relationships feel forced, and certain paths feel closed no matter how hard you try to walk them. Your spirit is recalibrating. You are being pulled out of spaces that can no longer hold who you are becoming. And before we go any further, if you feel this message resonating not just in your mind, but in your body, in your spirit, comment, "I am chosen," like this video and subscribe, because clarity is part of your preparation. Now let's dive deeper. What you are sensing is a quiet but deliberate separation process. When a person is marked for a higher assignment, their energy begins to shift before their circumstances do. Internally, you outgrow the old version of yourself long before the outer world catches up. This creates discomfort. It creates loneliness. It creates the illusion that something is wrong. But nothing is wrong. You are being repositioned. Notice how distractions are falling away. Notice how chaos no longer excites you. Notice how your soul now craves stillness, truth, and depth. This is not accidental. This is refinement. You are being trained to stand alone without feeling abandoned, to walk forward without external validation, to trust your inner knowing, even when others cannot see what you see. That sense of isolation you've been feeling is not meant to break you. It is meant to sharpen you. It is teaching you discernment. It is teaching you silence. It is teaching you strength without noise. Many people mistake this phase as being forgotten, but in reality, you are being hidden. Hidden things are protected things. Seeds grow in darkness before they ever break the surface. And right now, you are in the soil. This is why certain people have exited your life without explanation. This is why doors you expected to open stayed shut. This is why you've been forced to slow down, to sit with yourself, to confront truths you once avoided. Your spirit is being aligned with its original assignment. You are shedding identities that were built for survival, not destiny. And yes, it feels uncomfortable because transformation always does. But understand this clearly. What is leaving your life cannot follow you where you are going. What is being removed would have interfered with what is being prepared. You are not behind. You are not late. You are exactly where you need to be. This is the phase where clarity replaces confusion, where inner authority replaces external approval, where quiet confidence replaces the need to prove anything. Stay grounded. Stay aware. Stay obedient to what your spirit is signaling, because this separation is temporary, but what it is making room for is permanent. You are not being isolated. You are being positioned. Point 1. God separated you before others could access what was growing inside you. There are moments in a chosen one's life when connection becomes dangerous, not because people are evil or ill-intentioned, but because access without alignment creates quiet leakage, a slow draining of clarity, focus, and spiritual strength. You were entering a phase where your perception was sharpening, your intuition was becoming more precise, and your presence was beginning to carry a weight that could no longer be handled casually. And God, seeing further than you could at the time, understood that if everyone continued to have unrestricted access to you, pieces of your energy would be pulled into conversations, expectations, and emotional obligations you were never meant to carry. So the separation began softly, almost invisibly. Conversations lost their depth, messages went unanswered, invitations faded without explanation. Familiar faces felt oddly distant, as if an invisible wall had formed overnight. At first, you turned inward with confusion. You questioned your behavior, your tone, your worth. You wondered if you had said the wrong thing or become too much or not enough. But nothing was wrong with you. What changed was your frequency, and when frequency shifts, access must be adjusted. God separated you not to punish you and not to make you lonely, but to preserve what was forming inside you. There are insights being shaped in you that cannot survive constant noise. There is wisdom being assembled that cannot coexist with constant distraction. Just as seeds do not grow in open air but beneath the soil, shielded from interference, your development required darkness, stillness, and distance. This season was not about loss, it was about protection. It was not rejection, it was redirection. God was closing doors, not because you were unworthy of connection, but because you were becoming too valuable to be handled without care. The silence you entered was not empty, it was structured. The isolation was not accidental. It was intentional. This was not abandonment. This was containment. Point 2. Your loneliness is not a sentence, it is a signal. Loneliness, for the chosen one, carries information. It is not the sharp, panicked loneliness born from fear of abandonment or the need to be seen. It is quieter, heavier, and far more deliberate. It arrives without drama and settles into the background of your days, not to wound you, but to recalibrate you. This loneliness forces you inward, stripping away noise, performance, and distraction, until awareness becomes unavoidable. In this space, you began noticing patterns you once overlooked. You saw how often you gave without receiving, not because others demanded it, but because you were conditioned to overextend. You noticed how frequently you listened while your own voice remained unheard, how often you carried emotional weight that was never yours to hold, responsibilities silently assigned to you because of your strength, empathy, or reliability. Loneliness became the environment where discernment matured, where emotional reflexes slowed down and clarity took their place. You learned the difference between presence and attachment, realizing that being close does not mean being consumed. You learned the difference between connection and dependency, understanding that shared energy should nourish, not drain. You learned the difference between love and obligation, recognizing that love offered under pressure is no longer love, but survival. This season trained you to sit with yourself without collapsing, without numbing, and without reaching outward to be rescued. You learned how to be still without feeling empty, how to exist without explanation, and how to stand alone without hardening your heart. And that ability alone separates you from most people, because most people flee silence, flee reflection, and flee themselves. You did not. You stayed. You listened. You integrated what surfaced. This loneliness refined your emotional boundaries, sharpened your intuition, and restored your sense of self-respect. You are not being punished with solitude. You are being trained through it. Trained to recognize alignment. Trained to walk away without guilt. Trained to choose depth over familiarity. Trained to recognize who deserves access to you and who was only meant to pass through. When connection returns, it will not be random rushed, or draining. It will meet you where you stand now, whole, aware, and unshakable. Point 3. God removed you before you were emotionally drained beyond repair. There are people who benefit deeply from a chosen one's presence without ever protecting it. They lean on your clarity when their world feels confusing. They rely on your calm when their emotions spiral. They draw from your stability because it gives them a sense of order they have not cultivated within themselves. And for a long time, you allowed it. Not because you were weak, but because you believed love meant endurance, patience, and self-sacrifice. You believed that being strong meant carrying more than your share without complaint. But endurance without boundaries does not lead to holiness. It leads to depletion. Over time, something subtle began to happen. Your energy grew thinner. Your joy became quieter. Your spirit started to feel heavy in ways you couldn't fully explain. God saw the imbalance forming long before you did. He saw the fatigue settling into your soul. He saw how often you showed up for others while neglecting your own restoration. He saw the quiet resentment you refused to name because you didn't want to see yourself as unloving or selfish. And instead of allowing that slow erosion to continue, he intervened. The distance that formed was not punishment. It was not abandonment. It was not cruelty. It was mercy disguised as separation. God removed you from dynamics where you were constantly pouring but never being replenished, where your role was to stabilize others at the cost of your own wholeness. Isolation became the boundary you didn't yet know how to set for yourself. In that stillness, your nervous system began to unwind from survival mode. Your body learned what safety felt like again. Your spirit, no longer on constant alert, finally had room to rest. And in that quiet space, something sacred began to happen. Your identity started to reassemble, not around what you give, but around who you are. You began to remember that your value was never meant to be proven through exhaustion. God was not taking people away to hurt you. He was protecting what he placed inside you. This season is not emptiness. It is restoration. It is God teaching you that being chosen does not mean being consumed. It means being preserved, strengthened, and prepared for relationships that honor the full weight of who you are. Point 4. Your presence became too clarifying for unaligned people. Not everyone walked away because they stopped caring. Some walked away because your awareness made them uncomfortable, because something in you began to shift, and they could no longer relate to the version of you that tolerated confusion, silence, or half-truths. As you grew, you stopped over-explaining yourself to people who were committed to misunderstanding you. You stopped chasing approval from those who only offered it when you stayed small. You stopped shrinking your truth to preserve a fragile peace that was never truly peaceful. And when that happens, something subtle but powerful occurs. You become a mirror. Without saying a word, your presence begins to reflect people back to themselves. They start noticing their inconsistencies, their unspoken motives, and their unresolved wounds that they had buried beneath distraction and noise. Around you, excuses feel thinner. Masks feel heavier. And not everyone is willing to sit with that kind of exposure. So instead of looking inward, they pull away. Instead of taking responsibility, they project. Instead of rising, they distance themselves. This is not because you became cold, distant, or superior. It is because clarity is confronting. Awareness disrupts comfort. Light does not always provoke an attack. Sometimes it triggers retreat. Darkness often survives by avoiding illumination, not by fighting it. So when people withdraw from you, it is often a confession they cannot articulate. Your presence asks questions they are not ready to answer. Your silence reveals truths they hoped would remain hidden. And that is why the loneliness arrived, not as punishment, not as rejection, but as a byproduct of alignment. Your isolation was not created by a lack of worth, charm, or value. It was created by your refusal to abandon yourself any longer. It was created by your increasing discernment, your sharpened perception, your decision to stand upright in your own clarity. What feels like loss is often space being cleared. What feels like abandonment is often protection in disguise. You did not lose people because you were not enough. You outgrew dynamics that required you to stay unaware. And that growth demanded distance, not because you failed, but because you finally saw clearly. Point 5. God was clearing space for alignment, not popularity. You are not meant to be surrounded by many. You are meant to be surrounded by the right ones. And this truth becomes clearer the deeper you step into alignment. The people being prepared to walk with you next will not require you to perform, explain yourself, or shrink your essence to remain acceptable. They will not compete with your growth or secretly resent the expansion of your spirit. They will not question your boundaries as if your self-respect were a threat. Their presence will feel steady, calm, and natural, not draining or confusing. But understand this clearly. They could not arrive while the wrong connections still occupied space. God clears rooms before he introduces destiny. This is why the pruning felt sudden and unannounced. This is why multiple relationships shifted at once, almost violently, as if a silent hand swept through your life without warning. This is why familiar voices faded, routines dissolved, and people you once trusted became distant or incompatible overnight. It felt personal, but it was precise. It felt cruel, but it was calculated. What you experienced was not chaos. It was order being restored. It was not rejection. It was redirection. When God is preparing you for a higher level of purpose, he removes anything that cannot survive where you are going. Anything built on access instead of alignment cannot follow you forward. Anything that benefits from your silence, your overgiving, or your self-doubt must be released. That stripping away was not punishment. It was protection. It was preparation. Alignment requires emptiness first, because fullness without clarity creates confusion. Space had to be created for resonance to enter. Silence had to arrive before the right voices could be heard. Solitude had to come before true companionship could recognize you. What felt like isolation was actually recalibration. What felt like loss was refinement. You were not being abandoned. You were being repositioned. And when the next connections arrive, they will not feel loud or dramatic. They will feel inevitable. They will meet you where you are, not where you used to be. And in that moment, you will understand why nothing else was allowed to stay. Point 6. This season built emotional independence and spiritual authority. You learned how to regulate your emotions without external validation, not because life became easier, but because you stopped outsourcing your stability to the opinions of others. You learned how to sit with discomfort without numbing it, without distractions, without running, allowing the tension to teach you instead of break you. You learned how to trust your inner voice without constant reassurance, recognizing that clarity often arrives in whispers, not noise. This is rare, and it is powerful, because most people cannot remain alone with themselves long enough to hear what is true. Most people avoid stillness because stillness exposes contradictions, attachments, and fears they are not ready to confront. You did not escape it. You endured it, and through that endurance, something subtle but irreversible formed within you. You developed authority, not the loud kind that demands attention, but the quiet kind that naturally commands respect, the kind that does not argue because it no longer needs to prove itself, the kind that observes carefully, listens deeply, and chooses when to act rather than reacting impulsively. Your presence began to slow rooms down. Your silence started carrying weight. You move deliberately now, aware that every step carries consequence and intention. This is the internal posture of a chosen one stepping into leadership, whether visible or unseen. Leadership that does not seek permission. Leadership that does not announce itself. Leadership is rooted in self-mastery, emotional restraint, and inner alignment. You're no longer driven by urgency or validation. You're guided by discernment. And that is why others feel it, even when you say nothing. Point 7. The loneliness is lifting, but you are not returning to who you were. This season is closing, but you are not re-entering life as the same person. You now recognize energy before words, patterns before promises, alignment before attachment. You will no longer chase connection. You will recognize it. And when people enter your life now, they will feel the difference immediately. Your peace will speak before you do. Your presence will carry weight without effort. And you will understand, finally, why the isolation was necessary. It protected you long enough for you to become who you were always meant to be. Chosen one, if this message spoke to you, comment, "I am chosen," like this video to affirm what your spirit already knows. And subscribe, because understanding your calling is part of walking in it. Your loneliness was never abandonment. It was protection. And now you are ready.